Hey, still getting used to this new camera format. I'm just going to read out a report here, and again, I'm looking at it and not looking at the camera, so hopefully this goes smoothly. This is from the National Review, but I've seen this particular story highlighted in other publications, and the headline is Chinese government assigning Han men to live and sleep with Uyghur women whose husbands have been detained. This is by Tobias Hoonhout. The Chinese government assigns men as relatives to monitor the families of detained Muslim Uyghur men in China's Xinjiang province in order to promote ethnic unity, according to a report from Radio Free Asia. Titled the Pair Up and Become Family Programme, the initiative involves Uyghurs opening their homes for weeks at a time to communist officials who work, eat and even sleep with the family. They help the families with their ideology, bringing new ideas. They talk to them about life, during which time they develop feelings for one another, a government source with intimate knowledge of the programme told Radio Free Asia. We also try to help them make proper sleeping arrangements. It is now considered normal for females to sleep in the same platform with their paired male relatives. In Xinjiang province, the Chinese Communist Party overtly discriminates against the Uyghurs, denying them the right to worship and surveilling them with phone tracking and face scanning technology. Roughly 1 million Uyghurs are held in camps that the government calls free hospital treatment for the masses with sick thinking, from which accounts of attempted political indoctrination and torture have emerged. Earlier this month, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced visa restrictions on Chinese officials believed to participate in the repression of the Uyghurs. US corporations have been mostly silent on the treatment of the Uyghurs. The NBA, which was at the centre of major controversy over US-China relations last month, recently removed details from its website of an NBA development academy, which is housed in Xinjiang, but has not commented publicly as to whether this is closed. In October, Disney CEO Robert Iger told the Wall Street Journal's Tech Live conference that to take a position on China that could harm our company in some form would be a big mistake. This is disgusting if true. I have to put the caveat if true, of course, but when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, I would believe almost anything, because this is the nature of a totalitarian regime, and forced Han assimilation into the western provinces, Tibet and Xinjiang, the western regions, is nothing new. There's been a lot of focus this year on what's happening in Hong Kong, understandably so, but what's happening in Xinjiang is, I think, unparalleled in the 21st century. So many people incarcerated at once for political reasons, with the possible exception of North Korea. This is really a grave crisis, and whilst I've been very critical of the Trump administration, and I still am, with good cause I believe, I am pleased that senior Trump officials, maybe not the man himself, but senior figures like Mike Pompeo and others have been outspoken on this. Because really, firstly, freedom of religion is a human right. I know not all atheists might agree with that, but the right to freely practice your religion, your faith, without imposing on others is a human right. And China's treatment of its Uyghurs is disgusting. It's appalling. It's, I think, amounting to a sort of cultural genocide. And this is happening right now. And we're so tied up with Brexit in this country that it does distract us from everything else. I'm very concerned about what's happening in our universities, about how Beijing is stoking up the Chinese diaspora, but I think there's a lot of things going on around Chinese power in the world today. And I think, like all bullies, the only language the Chinese Communist Party understands is strength. So if one adversary criticises them, then they'll get Global Times to get into a vitriolic jingoistic rant against that person. But if more and more nations start standing up to China, they'll start to get the message. China is a powerful country, but the Chinese regime and Xi Jinping need to realise that they're not above he may have the power to do what he wants within China. He may even have the power to bully small Pacific nations. But it will take strong Western countries to say, and anyone else who cares about this, to say, actually China can't just throw its weight around. China cannot continue to do these things with impunity. Yes, this is an uphill struggle because China's got a kind of pact of silence with a lot of countries that shamelessly signed up not only to be silent on what China's doing, but to actively make excuses for it. The so-called Ummah does not exist. The likes of Pakistan will be very quick to criticise Israel, but they turn a blind eye to China. I don't believe it's the responsibility of Western governments to protect Uyghur people per se. Certainly no sort of intervention, but I do think we have a responsibility to speak out. And the thing about the Uyghurs is they are not hardline Islamists, so the Chinese regime doesn't really have any justification for this collective punishment, and that's what it is. As for this particular policy, you can imagine the situation. Your husband, your breadwinner perhaps, has vanished. You don't know exactly where he is, and some strange man is in your house, around your children, and you can't do anything because he's a communist official. That is the sort of thuggery of totalitarian states, and that's what we're seeing with Xi's regime. Of course, Chinese officials bristle at the term concentration camps, because they bristle when they know the truth is being levelled against them. The Chinese Communist Party hates the truth, and the only thing they're interested in is power and saving face. That's the only two things they really, really fundamentally care about. So they're never in a million years going to tell outside observers the truth about the purpose of these concentration camps. I would like to see China made an international pariah, and of course they will use overseas nationalism as a kind of bulwark against that. That's why maybe we need some vetting on Chinese nationals coming in. We can say, if you want to come here to study, to work, to travel, that's fine. But you're not here to promote the Chinese Communist Party. We cannot realistically say you're not allowed to support the Chinese Communist Party, but if they're going to actively try and wave the Chinese flag around in other countries, I think we need to be much, much more robust in standing up to that. And one of my major criticisms of Western governments, particularly mine, particularly the British government, has consistently been too soft with China. David Cameron and George Osborne, triumphantly heralded the golden era, but it's been nothing but a charade. It's totally one-sided. The Chinese will say that these billion-dollar trades help British jobs, they're good for the British people, but it comes at the price of selling out our values and potentially our sovereignty, because when we have a powerful foreign adversary having this much control, which would happen if Huawei goes ahead, which would happen if CGTN continues to have its license in London, if Confucius Institutes continue to operate. And I've been looking at the work that Tom Turgan had, I think that's how his name's pronounced, it's an unusual name, but he's a Conservative backbench MP who's been very vocal on this issue, and I give him great credit for that. I support any MP who is prepared to speak up against China, because this is a very real problem. We can't realistically just cut off ties with China, but we need to show that we're not going to be pushed around, and we're not going to be silenced on speaking up and saying the right things. Because China gets its nasty jingoistic mouthpieces like Global Times to spout out lies and to spout out anti-Western conspiracy theories. There is no concerted effort that I can see by a Western government, certainly not the British government, to actively interfere within Chinese internal affairs. Even if we wanted to, it would be practically very difficult. They've no evidence for that, yet they keep using that as a sort of cover, because it's to scare people. It's to say, oh well, something's going wrong, let's blame the foreigners. That's what the Chinese regime always does, because it's actually very, very jingoistic. So this is a troubling report, but it's not surprising. I just would like to see more Western governments be as vocal as Mike Pompeo. and other American officials. I've been pretty critical of the Trump administration. I still believe that Trump personally is much more motivated by his own narcissism than what's right. I mean, I can't overlook when Trump said, oh well, regarding the Hong Kong unrest, oh well, they'll sort something out, just to dismiss it like that. I don't believe Trump can be trusted to uphold human rights and Western values. But some of the people around him, I think Mike Pompeo, I quite like Pompeo. I think he's outspoken on these things, and you need a Secretary of State who is. Our ambassador to the UN, Karen Pierce, has been outspoken, on issues around human rights. But I would like to see the government, I'd like to see Johnson and Raab really being vocal about this and not making any apologies to China. Of course Beijing will have a tantrum, let them. We need to just say, okay, you have your little tantrum, but we're going to say what we believe. I honestly think that one way forward could be using Beijing's own language against it, because Beijing loves to talk about victimhood. It loves to talk about you're hurting the feelings of the Chinese people, which they really mean the Chinese Communist Party. We need to start using that sort of language against them. Like, if it means more hyperbole, so be it. We need to say something along the lines of, we take note that Global Times has had a hysterical reaction to the British government's position. We need to start using that sort of dramatic language, because it's what they've been using for years, and if we continue to be overly polite and overly diplomatic, they're just going to continue walking over us. I do not believe that China is a friend of this country, the Chinese government. I'm not talking about the Chinese people. I think people to people basis, that's a different matter, or at least it should be, except those who are being used as pawns by the state. But I've no problem with the Chinese people, people who want to work or study or travel here. I have nothing against those people personally. However, if they're going to come here and wave around the Chinese flag and get knee-jerk defensive about the Chinese communist regime, then they can't exactly expect to be treated with respect. Respect is earned. That's something Beijing needs to understand. It seems to think it could do whatever the hell it wants and then demand respect. And I think Western powers need to just say, actually, no. There's international laws, there's international standards. Okay, America may not always abide by them. I personally think that we shouldn't be afraid to speak out against anyone, including the United States, incidentally, when we disagree with the Americans. But China is no friend of the West, and it's about time we woke up and realised that.